worked for Mrs. Newman to stand up, or at the very least, raise your hand. I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much. Yeah. When I first arrived at Berea, Mrs. Newman shared her dream with me of teaching girls how various mitzvos developed. Mrs. Newman lamented the fact that she had never had the opportunity to see sources from the Gemara and the Poskim in the actual text. She didn't want to learn how to learn a page of Gemara. She didn't want to teach her girls how to learn a page of Gemara. She just wanted to know that she could look into a sefer and read it and say, okay, that's where it says whatever that her Rabbeim were teaching her. Our Torah Sheba'al Peh curriculum was born when Rav Pinchas Teitz, Zichrono Livracha, supported her desire to make these sources available through our now well-known throughout the country Torah Sheba'al Peh source books. As Berea graduates know, every year we put on a music and dance extravaganza known as Mother-Daughter Luncheon. While I may have had the musical expertise, Mrs. Newman had the formula that made Mother-Daughter Luncheon a resounding success. Don't know if those of you who are in the school know how Mother-Daughter became what it became, but every summer we would get together at her home in Flatbush and spend an afternoon, usually into the evening, in the only thing I can describe it as is an intense think tank of creativity. And in Mrs. Newman's eyes, the recipe for a great mother-daughter luncheon included some drama, some inspiration, some information, some dances, a few beautiful songs, a dash of laughter, and a bucket of tears. Those of you who sat through it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was a winning combination and received accolades year in and year out. While many of Mrs. Newman's students were recipients of her personal brand of caring, I'm not sure that her students know that those who worked with her and for her also received her personal attention. If there was something going on in our personal lives, not only was she willing to listen, but she went out of her way to actively help us out. And I believe each one of us in this room can probably tell their own story about how Mrs. Newman helped us. So it wasn't just her students that she did this for. She did this for us, for her faculty. In my early years in the school, I had many a, quote, therapy session with her as I worked out the personal challenges in my life. Just knowing we could lean on her for that kind of support was such a comfort. And finally, before I hand the microphone over to tonight's speakers, I would like to share one critical point of chinuch that was near and dear to Mrs. Newman's heart. And I know I'm stealing somebody's thunder moving on, but I live in this school with Mrs. Newman's philosophy literally soaked into every fiber of this building. Many wonder at what makes Berea so successful. It's not such a secret. As Rav Volbe Zichrono Livracha writes in his Sefer on Chinuch, one major aspect of Chinuch is planting seeds. The challenge is making sure the seeds get into the neshama. One must plow the field before seeding it. And in Berea, the unique relationships the faculty and administration has with the students opens the girls' neshamos up to the ideas that they learn in class. They're ready to hear the information because they experience the faculty's total commitment to them. I know you're going to say this later, but let everybody hear this numerous times tonight. How many times did we hear Mrs. Newman's mantra of they won't care how much they know until they know how much we care. And what's amazing is that I never realized that it worked on me as well as on her students. Now that I have to fill Mrs. Newman's shoes in an impossible task, I realized that I learned so much more from her than I ever thought I had learned. It's clear as day that I learned what she taught because I knew how much she cared about me and about Bruriah. And I can only pray that I make her proud as she watches from above. I now have the honor of calling upon Mrs. Newman's boss and Mora de Asra of the Elizabeth community, Harav Elazar Meir Teitz.
Thank you, Rabbi Oretz. I've often thought that the biggest contribution I made during my years in the Rabbanus in Elizabeth was hiring Mrs. Newman, because it changed the community, it changed chinuch for women in general, once she got a chance to show what it's all about. There are two kinds of leaders. Some have creativity. They're constantly churning up new ideas, new programs, new thoughts. And that takes a lot of skill. There are others who are detailed people. They take a job through to its completion, caring for every single detail. Mrs. Newman was that rare individual who was both. She came up with the ideas. She was a Mein HaMizgaber when it came to thoughts for new programs, for new ideas. But she also oversaw every detail of those programs to see to it that it was brought to proper fruition. This even carried over into her personal life. Those who ever received Shalach Manos from Mrs. Newman know that it was a culinary delight, but prepared in a manner which was Tavo Le'inayim as well, care given to every aspect. This was indicative of the personality that she was, not just to come up with the ideas for others to do. You know, there's someone said, "Avar mi yid is there was tut a heiser yid heist yenimton." A warm Jew is one who does, and a hot Jew, where haste means to command as well as to be hot, is one who tells someone else what to do. There is a definition of perfectionist given, which is that a perfectionist is one who takes infinite pains and gives them to everyone else. But she took them for herself. She took upon herself the pains that were involved in bringing to perfection all of her creative ideas. And she came up with many things which were emulated or are beginning to be emulated by schools throughout the country. I'm not just talking about programs like Mother-Daughter Luncheon, but the ideas of Leila Yiyun and Yimei Yiyun. She was the first principal, to the best of my knowledge, who, well, first of all, Bruriah was one of the earliest schools when it came to sending students to Israel, and still has an enviable percentage, topping 90% most years, if not all years. But as far as Mrs. Newman was concerned, the interest in the student did not end with graduation. And she was the first one, I believe, who made it a point to go during Thanksgiving vacation to see how her girls were settling in, what problems they might have that need taken care of. Not saying goodbye at graduation, but continuing on. By the way, I was impressed when Rabbi Yored said about how Mother-Daughter Luncheon was prepared. You'll note that this was summertime. Summertime is supposed to be vacation. Vacation is supposed to mean resting from the work that one does all year long. But I don't think that she could get along without Bruriah for a day. Be it summer, be it winter, be it Yantif, no matter what. And she was Bruriah. She made it what it was. This building was built at the very beginning of her tenure. In fact, it was in the building stages when she began. By the time she left, it had doubled in size, physically, and quadrupled in terms of enrollment. I heard my father, once say that he used to wonder when he was learning Gemara, and learning about Dinei Mominus, monetary disputes. So you have the K'tzais and the Nesivos saying deep thoughts. He says, after all, what are we talking about? We're talking about Chaim Yankel, the shoemaker, having a din Torah with Israel Yehuda, the butcher, over 10 rubles. This was in Europe. How are they supposed to know the reasoning that's in the K'tzais, the reasoning that's in the Nesivos? They're Amaratzim, they don't know. But he says he was at many a din Torah where the sides were arguing, and the shoemaker was arguing in K'tzais and the butcher was arguing in Nesivos. Why? Because it was his. And when it was his, he could reach points that he might not be capable of doing otherwise. That's how Mrs. Newman treated each and every one of the students in Berea. They were hers. She cared. And that care manifested itself while they were here and after they left to this day. I got a call from a woman who was not really associated with Berea, but with whom I've had dealings in matters of Igun, Agunas. And she wanted to know if she would be able to hear the program in Eretz Yisrael, because Mrs. Newman was her 5th grade teacher in Flatbush, and it changed her for life and made her what she was. This is the influence that she had on individuals, and it came from caring for each and every one. Sometimes even more than she cared for her own, I suspect. She did not keep her ideas to herself. And in fact, in her later years in Torah Masorah, where she threw herself into her work with every bit of dedication that she threw herself into Berea during the 37 years that she was here, she was doing just that, spreading the word about her programs. But while she could give them the idea of the program, she could not give them the personality that made those programs the success, and the ability to encourage the participation of the students at every step of the way. Not to tell them what to do, but together with them to create a program so that the program was theirs, not just hers. One of the things that she was mechadesh, as I was discussing earlier before, was that it is all right to ask questions. That you don't get your head bitten off if you dare raise a question, as long as it's respectfully done, and done for the sake of knowing and not amnas lekanter. But that was a revolution in education, especially for girls. And that, too, was the stamp of a Berea girl who knew why, not just what, and cared deeply about it. You're going to hear from many others, and I could go on. I think that she was one of a kind. You can't bottle that and market it to others. She was sui generis. She was the first and the only who could reach in that way and have the impact that she had on everyone who came into contact with her. I was thinking to myself as I looked around, obviously you couldn't have an evening dedicated to Mrs. Newman without food being served, and served beautifully. That too was a hallmark. She cared not just about the neshama, but about the guf as well. And everything was a learning experience. There was a famous incident where she made a wedding here in Berea for a student who unfortunately had nothing, no support from home either, and she actually made a full-scale catered wedding, using it as a learning experience. So the girls could see what happens at a chasana before they have to experience it themselves, so that they can do the chesed that goes with it. And chesed was a very major portion of programs that she introduced in Berea. It wasn't just the Torah v'avoda. The Gemilas Chasadim was part and parcel of every aspect of the Berea program. And everything that came was a learning experience and was utilized in that way. I I think that everyone who was here was, either directly or indirectly, influenced by her, and knows exactly what she represented and what a loss to Yiddishkeit, what a loss especially to education of women her passing is. May she be a Melitza Yosher for all, and may all of us learn the lessons that she sought to teach, applied in our own lives, and that would be the best mazkeres we could have for her.
I often wondered what it was like to teach for Mrs. Newman and then also be part of her family. It was an experience that I was never going to have, but Mrs. Pikus certainly has had that experience. In all the years that Mrs. Newman was here, Mrs. Pikus just went about her business pretty much doing what she had been taught to do by her mother. After Mrs. Newman left here to move on to Torah Masorah, Mrs. Pikus continued all those skills. It's really a phenomenal thing to watch. Someone who grew up in the home with Mrs. Newman and then brought those shitos hachinuch directly to the building and continues to do so. In the years that after Mrs. Newman left here, she continued to be in touch with me, and she always knew exactly what was going on in the school, and that was okay with me, because it was important for her to know what was going on here so that she could continue to mentor me. I'd like to call upon Mrs. Shlomo Pikus to share her thoughts with us.
In the parsha we read yesterday, Parshas Vayeshlach, Yaakov says to Shimon and Levi, in response to the killing of the males of Shechem, Achartem osi lahavisheni biyoshev haaretz. Yaakov says, you have besmirched my reputation, and harshly criticizes Shimon and Levi for those killings. V'nishmadati ani uvesi. As a result of your actions, the other nations that inhabit this land may attack, and I and my household will be destroyed. Shimon and Levi heatedly reply, Vayomru, and they said, Hachizona ya'aseh achosenu? Should our sister be treated like a zona? And Yaakov doesn't reply. He was so vehement in his objection. Where is his response? Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky explains that the reply is found in Berchas Yaakov, when Yaakov Avinu says to Shimon and Levi, Arur apam ki az, Va'avrasam ki kashasa, achalkeim b'Yaakov afitzem b'Yisrael. Yaakov curses their rage for its intensity and says that they will be dispersed among the land as sophrim, scribes, and teachers. Many Mefarshim explain this to be a punishment, midah keneged midah. However, Rashi says that it means that the teachers of Klal Yisrael will come from Shimon and Levi. How can this be? Were killers of the city to be turned into the teachers of Klal Yisrael? The answer is that Shimon and Levi took Dinah's pain as their own. They felt true anguish about her plight and acted as a result. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky explains that only people who internalize the pain of others and respond to it as if it is their own pain can be teachers. If you lack the passion, you can't be an effective machanech. My mother, Mrs. Chaya Newman, Harayani Kaparas Meshkava, had a relentless drive that was fueled by her pure and passionate idealism. Her passion was the hallmark of her success. The Berea school she joined was very small. While this building was being built, classes were held in the Y. Mrs. Newman's office was in the hallway, right near the payphone that served as the school's phone. The school grew, and its students thrived. Her success wasn't just as an exemplary teacher and talented principal. It could be measured by the personal impact she had on her students. To be a Berea student, you needed to be open to growth. There was no specific mold you needed to fit into, nor was there a specific endpoint in mind. You didn't have to be an A student either. You just needed to be willing to grow. No matter what the background of the girl, religious or academic, they all needed to be inspired to build up their Yiras Shamayim and their Avodas Hashem, even though the path to achieve that goal had to be tailored to the needs of each individual girl. The goal was growth. She understood that each girl represented the continuity of Klal Yisrael, and so she often repeated, educate a boy, and you have educated a man. Educate a girl, and you have educated a family. A letter we received from a parent of a former Berea student included this exchange. When my daughter came to her high school interview, I accompanied her. After my daughter met with Mrs. Newman, she invited me in. I sat down and was greeted with a beaming smile. Mr. So-and-so, your daughter is a lady. She is so put together. I looked at Mrs. Newman and responded, but she refuses to do one iota of work. Her response was as warm as her initial assessment. Don't worry, she is going to blossom. Just be patient. I was patient, and the parent continued, she did blossom. From the young lady who looked lovely to the young professional she is today, scoring success in her chosen profession. She is a tribute to the insight Mrs. Newman had and to her singular understanding of each girl as an individual with the ability to succeed. This is just one of so many stories that reflect her philosophy described in this mashal by the Mata Yehuda. The mashal actually refers to someone preparing for Yom Hadin, but you will excuse my use of it to describe the very special brand of chinuch my mother practiced. It was the end of the summer, the harvest time, and a farmer with a loaded wagon prepared to take it into his barn. He tried, but the wagon was too full and the door was too narrow. A passerby with a magnifying glass decides to have a good time with this farmer, and he offers the magnifying glass to the farmer and says, maybe you can use this to get the wagon into the barn. The farmer turns it and it enlarges the door, but the loaded wagon still can't fit. The passerby suggests that he turns the magnifying glass around, and the wagon gets smaller, but it still can't make it through the door. Until you actually widen the door and lighten the load, that wagon isn't going anywhere. She always repeated, Rabbi Aretz, here it comes, they won't care how much they know until they know how much we care. So she would lighten the load or widen the door. At Berea, my mother innovated. Although her approach to chinuch was based on Mesorah, she wasn't afraid to think out of the box and use innovative methods to teach and reach her girls. She was the creator of so many programs that are the norm today in schools all over the United States. She established Shemei Yun, brought in guest teachers, and dedicated the day to growth in one particular area. Everyone does this today. But in 1974, she was the first and only girls' school to offer programming of this sort. Freshman orientation in the early days included a sleepover, an opportunity for a diverse group of girls from myriad feeder schools to connect and make friends so that no one felt alone on that first day of school. And she was the one who stayed the night with them. Her devotion to Berea was the stuff of legends. How many times when a program ended late would she decide to sleep in her office? Why schlep back to Brooklyn just to turn around and come back a few hours later? Berea continued to thrive, and her creativity continued as well. Frum Club, later renamed Midos Tovos, a voluntary after-school program that made it cool to be frum. The Jewish History Trip, an idea initiated by a student who might be here tonight, Tova Plotkin, and was encouraged by her Jewish history teacher, Mrs. Rasi Busel Alel Shalom, but directed by Mrs. Newman, evolved into a 2-day overnight trip to see Jewish New York. And the whole junior class had a sleepover at Mrs. Newman's house on the night in between the 2 days. Father-daughter learning, mother-daughter learning. Visiting seniors in Israel, you've heard that. But Mrs. Newman considered the year in Israel the 5th year of high school. And so she would visit her girls to make sure their chosen school was a good fit and to help those girls who needed to change. Everyone does it now. but she was the first one, and for a long time, she was the only one. She even raised money to send girls who could otherwise not afford to go to Israel, but for whom the year away, immersed in learning, was vital to their growth. During this time, she also maintained a private practice in family therapy under the auspices of Counterforce, something she would continue for the next 30 years. Her teachers felt blessed to be working with her as well. The following is an excerpt from an article written by Mrs. Naomi Krupenya, who taught ninth graders in Berea for 15 years. And she wrote, "Rare is the person who is so selfless in her mission that there is simply no zich, no I in the picture, ever. She never felt threatened by a particular teacher's success or popularity amongst the girls. Quite the contrary. She couldn't be more delighted, because she knew that the girls' love of that teacher would ultimately nurture a greater love for Dvar Hashem. This was her goal, and she used this as her guide, never losing focus." Now you must be wondering, how did all this dedication impact on us, her family? I have 4 brothers, but hundreds of sisters. We shared my mother with so many, and my father was so proud of her accomplishments, and so we were as well. There were definitely times in my life, as an early teenager, that I wasn't thrilled about the sharing, but she wisely brought me to school, with the permission of my principal, to participate in one of the early Yemei Yun, and I experienced her brand of education firsthand and developed an understanding and pride in her mission. On a personal note, my brothers and I had the most original Purim costumes, the best book report covers, and the most amazing science fair projects, including an igloo made out of sugar cubes that were iced to a round cake. When we moved into our home from an apartment, like many who moved from a very small apartment to a much larger home, there wasn't much furniture to go around, and like every 7th grader, all I wanted was that perfect bedroom set. But it was going to have to wait a while. After a couple of weeks of kvetching, and I'm sure I gave her an earful, she handed me a bag full of magic markers, and she said, "Invite some friends and decorate your wall." My father can tell you it took many, many coats of paint to cover that wall, but boy, did my friends think I had the coolest mother. She taught us by example, and we became attuned to the needs of others. She would often bring home a student, and I had a roommate, sometimes for a day, a few weeks, even once for 9 months. My brothers brought home friends from school, too. During Bein Hazmanim, boys who also needed a place where they could just be and somebody would listen. Early in my teaching career, I met a wonderful young woman who became a Berea student, and she's the student Rabbi Teitz was talking about. Ultimately, we, her Berea family, made a wedding for her here in Berea. She, her husband, and her son are still a part of our lives, and she has spent the last, or many last Pesach and the many, many years before in our home, and I certainly hope she'll continue to do so. My son pointed out at her levaya that she was a different bubby to every grandchild, giving what they needed, sometimes a little criticism, or just love and approval with no strings attached. My mother used to tell us she had a deal with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. She said, "You take care of my children, and I will take care of yours." And she had so much nachas from us, her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren. When she left Berea, and to paraphrase Rabbi Teitz at a dinner, he thanked her for 74 years of service, 36 years of days, and 36 years of nights. She went to Torah Masorah, where she was the first head of the women's division of the NCYP, the National Conference of Yeshiva Principals. She coordinated the women's cohort of the Eish Principals Fellowship, a 2-year program for principals sponsored jointly by the Federation and Torah Masorah. And she traveled all over the country to schools that needed a little bit of help or some encouragement, teaching teachers, mentoring principals to maximize their successes and to help them get beyond the challenges they might have faced. She produced a video entitled "Become a Teacher" to inspire young women to consider becoming teachers. She created full-day seminars at Torah Masorah, attended by several hundred teachers each year, a Chumash Day, a Navi Day, an Ivrit and Dikduk Day. She managed to cajole a catering hall into giving her their room, a nearby ShopRite into allowing everyone to park there for free, and even free Chumashim from a publisher. She created a program called Share and Share, where teachers at a particular grade level would get together, hear a speaker on a particular topic, and then, so important, teachers would sit and brainstorm with each other, sharing their ideas before a wrap-up. Together with Chavetz Chaim Heritage Foundation, she produced a curriculum on Ona'as Devarim for high school sophomores and juniors. Every project at Berea and Torah Masorah had a beginning, a middle, an end, follow-up, and of course, beautiful coordinating paper goods. At the end of the first year of her illness, after she had gotten a clean bill of health, she gathered all the teachers together and she said, "We're family, and I'd like to share something with you." And she reminded the teachers, men and women alike, about how important it was to make sure that they saw a doctor on a regular basis and paid attention to their bodies and their health. And she told the teachers, "I'm telling you because you're family, but I'm asking you to keep this private because family doesn't tell." And I know how many people were surprised to find that she had been ill for 10 years because the teachers, family, didn't speak. During that year, at one point she went for radiation weekly. But you see, she had a carpool of students she brought in from Brooklyn every day. And if she didn't bring them to school, who would? So she had the first appointment in Staten Island Hospital where my father worked, and she would go in for her treatment. And if there was ever traffic, they did not fill her slot. They waited because even the teachers knew Mrs. Newman had to get to Berea to her girls. One of my brothers repeated the following conversation he had with my mother after a major medical setback. Her recovery at that point was hard, and she told my brother, "The pasuk says, Keli, Keli, lama azaftani, why did you forsake me?" But my mother said, "No. For me, the pasuk says, Keli, Keli, lama azaftani. For what reason was I left in this world?" And so she got out of bed. There was so much to do. She continued to travel, to speak, to teach, to create, to innovate. Through all of her Yisurim and over the last few months, they were devastating. Her only response was, Baruch Hashem. In Tehillim Perek Mem Tes it says, Ki lo b'moso yikach hakol, lo yered acharav kevodo. And this pasuk is usually explained in a very sobering fashion. People are told when you die, you can't take it with you. However, it can also be explained, when you die, you don't take it all with you. You leave a legacy behind, a wealth of accomplishments and positive contributions to people and society. I'd like to end with something my brother Yaakov spoke about in his hesped. When we came home after a busy day, hers or ours, she greeted us not with the usual, "How was your day?" but she used to say, "What did you accomplish today?" Whether it was a school day, a Bein Hazmanim day, or after we married, a Chol Hamoed trip. Did you have fun? Did you spend quality family time? Did you accomplish? And that is one of the messages you should leave here with tonight. There is something to be accomplished every day. Don't let the time pass you by without recognizing the importance of making every day count. Make each day meaningful by making sure you have given to somebody else. One of her favorite sayings was, Ein davar ha'omed b'fnei haratzon. Face your challenges with a positive, can-do attitude, and you will, be'ezras Hashem, accomplish much. Thank you.
Mrs. Newman used to speak about her children all the time. They just don't know it. Those of us who worked with her, not just for her, but with her, we heard about you. We heard about the stories. We heard about the things that were going on in the house. I remember one time she was running a program with the girls here, and it was supposed to be a pie of how you were going to allocate the time in your life. And my daughter was in the school at the time, so she was in this program, and she was in Mrs. Newman's group. And they would get together, and they're supposed to figure out, okay, I'm going to have so much time to the family, and so much time to the job, and so much time to my davening and my eating, whatever it was. However, you are supposed to allocate your time. And Mrs. Newman said, here, let me show you what my pie looks like. Okay, and her pie was 95% Puria. And she wasn't out of balance. Somehow or another, that it's not a line. It's not that she gave 70 whatever years to us. It's really days and nights. This is a woman who just, I don't know if she knew what it meant to go to sleep. And so we heard about you, and we heard about the times that she spent with you, and she worried about you. Even with her deal with the Eibishter, she worried about you. And she talked about you, and she was so incredibly proud of you. I'd like to call upon Rav Eliyahu Newman, the Menahel of the Mir Mesivta High School, to address us.
Thank you, Rabbi Yoretz. In reality, it's difficult to stand here and speak. It was only a few years ago that I stood here and I spoke at one of the programs about Rav Gifter. They had a Gadol program where they learned about different Gedalim. And I'd like to preface what I'm saying today with a thought from Rav Gifter. Rav Gifter was a Telzer Rosh Yeshiva in Cleveland, Ohio. And my mother was Zeicha to be very close to the Gifters. Rav Gifter Zechreina Livracha had a tremendous regard for her. Yaakov Avinu, this past Parsha, Yaakov Avinu was confronted with Sarai Shalesav, and they're fighting, they're wrangling together, and Yaakov is victorious. And Yaakov grabbed on to Sarai Shalesav and wouldn't let him go. And the Malach said, Vayomer, Shalcheni, ki olah hashachar, send me. The morning has come. And Rashi brings down that Gemara in Chulin which tells us that the Malach pleaded with Yaakov Avinu, let me go. It's my turn to say Shira to Hashem. I've never said Shira yet. It's my turn. According to some Chazal, a Malach has only one opportunity to say Shira in its existence. And Rav Gifter Zechreina Livracha questioned, it's too coincidental. The day the Malach chose to start a fight with Yaakov Avinu was the day that was allotted for him to say Shira. And he explained it as follows. We have a misconception of what the Yetzer Tov is and what the Yetzer Hara is. The Yetzer Tov we know is there to elevate us, to bring us closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to bring us to his Avodah, to his mitzvahs, to his tefillah, to his gemilas chasadim. And the Yetzer Hara is there to draw us away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to pull us down, to lower us, to tempt us with nisyanos, to make us sin. And so the Yetzer Tov brings us closer to Hashem, and the job of the Yetzer Hara is to distance us from Hashem. And Rav Gifter said that's a mistake. Both the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara have one purpose. They were created to bring a Jew closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But there are two different approaches. The Yetzer Tov plies us with mitzvahs and good intentions to follow the ways of Hashem and to follow his mitzvahs. And in that manner we become closer. The Yetzer Hara is there to tempt us, to bring us nisyanos, to give us the opportunity to overcome those nisyanos. Like Avram Avinu was tested with 10 nisyanos. Each nisayon brought him closer and closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The job of the Yetzer Hara is not that he should be successful, that we should sin. But the job of the Yetzer Hara is to bring a temptation that we can overcome. And by overcoming that temptation, by overcoming that nisayon, by overcoming those obstacles, we become closer to Hashem. The Malach fought with Yaakov Avinu. This was Ma'aseh Avos Siman Labanim. The Yetzer Hara coming to attack Klal Yisrael. The Esav coming to fight and bring down the level of Klal Yisrael. And Yaakov was victorious. And with Yaakov's victory, the Malach reached its goal. He fulfilled his purpose. His purpose was to bring Yisrael closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to tempt them, but that they should overcome. And when the Malach completed its goal, the Malach had the opportunity to say Shira. Because when does a person say Shira? They say Shira upon completion, upon success, they say Shira. And this was the time the Malach was successful. And so the Malach was able to say Shira. And he told Yaakov Avinu, now it's no coincidence. It's because Yaakov Avinu was victorious that the Malach wasn't able to say Shira. Coming back from the Levaya, a family member was close to my mother, started to sing in the car. She began to sing. And her husband looked at her and said, singing? Coming back from the Levaya? He looked at her like she lost it. And she says, it's sad. Shitaka left us. But I'm singing about a life of fulfillment, a life of success, a life of remarkable accomplishments. I'm singing about a full life. My mother's life was a life of success, a life of accomplishment. As my sister mentioned, her question at the end of the day was, what did you accomplish today? Because every day required an accomplishment. Everything she did required. You have to do something. You have to, she coined the word, it has to be tachlitic. There had to be something concrete that came out of it. Yes, to sing Shira upon such accomplishments. The pasuk in Yirmiyah tells us, Al tifku lameis, and the pasuk continues, B'chu v'chai lahaylech. Don't cry for someone who dies, but cry, a real cry, for someone that leaves us. And the Kelma Magid explained the pasuk, do you cry for a mace, or don't you? And he explained as follows, there are people that they reach a certain stage in their life and they no longer produce. They continue to exist. Those people already died. They're not accomplishing. They're not contributing. Al tifku lames. But b'chu b'chai lahaylech. The one that continuously goes, the one that's haylech, that constantly continues and accomplishes and strives for more and more, that's the one you should cry for. The pasuk tells us, after Yaakov Avinu fought with the Malach, and the Malach tells him, Vayomer lo Yaakov, yeyomer roid shimcha, ki im Yisrael, ki sarisa im eleikim v'manoshim v'tuchal. Your name will no longer be Yaakov, but rather will be Yisrael, because you fought im eleikim, that's with the Malach of Esav, v'anoshim, and with Lavan, v'tuchal. The Gemara tells us, the Gemara in Brachos, that although after HaKadosh Baruch Hu changed Avram Avinu's name, and a person that calls Avram, is over a lav, over an essay. But Yaakov, even though his name was changed to Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu called him Yisrael, a later pasuk, and therefore we're allowed to call Yaakov Yisrael, we're allowed to call him Yaakov. And the question is, what's the difference between Avram and Yaakov? And the Shem Mishmuel says an unbelievable insight. The difference between a Yaakov and an Esav is Esav was Kishmai Keinu, Osu. He was complete. He felt he was perfect. He felt he was God's gift to humanity. There was nothing that he can do wrong. Everything that he did was right. He was never at fault. Yaakov, on the other hand, considered himself an Akev. He was a heel. He had still areas to grow. Although the Torah calls him a perfect individual, v'Yaakov ishtam, but Yaakov felt he had to grow, he had to build, he had to work, he had to strive, he had to steig. The reason why Yaakov Avinu was able to fight against the Malach, how can one fight against an angel and be victorious? And that's because a Malach is an oimed. A Malach stays at one level. He doesn't grow. He's what he was created, that's what he is. The Kedusha that he was created and fashioned by Hashem, that's where he remains. He's an oimed. And Yaakov Avinu was a hoylech. He kept on moving, he kept on going because of his namesake. He was an Akev. He felt that he still had to accomplish, he still had to grow. He never sat back and said, I did enough, I'm accomplished, and that's it. The rest is for somebody else to do. And therefore, he was a hoylech. A hoylech can overcome an oimed. A hoylech, one who is active, can be victorious over one that's stationary, one that stays in one place. And therefore, says the Shem Mishmuel, that Yaakov Avinu could not give up the name Yaakov. It couldn't be taken away from him. Because the power to be a Yisrael, to fight against a Malach and be victorious, comes because he's a Yaakov. And because he's a Yaakov, he has the ability to be a Yisrael. And if you take away the Yaakov, and perhaps that was the intent of the Malach, your name will be Yisrael. And therefore, you're accomplished. You've reached it. There's nothing more you can do. You're stronger than the angels. But Hashem said, no, you're still a Yaakov. And this was my mother's life. She never stopped. Never, ever stopped. It was in the summer. It was on vacation. It was Yom Tovim. It was always, what can she do more? There's more to accomplish. That's my responsibility. She was a hoylech. B'chu v'chei la hoylech. She felt she always had to grow. And in fact, I heard this in one of the teachers in Beruria. My mother used to go to the Terem B'Sara convention many, many years. And she asked her, why are you running to the Terem B'Sara conventions? Is there anything over there that you don't know? You're listening to presenters, but you've been there and done that. You have it all. And she would say, if I learned one new insight, one new way to reach a student, another enhancement to a project that I have, another way to give something over, it was worth the entire convention. She was a hoylech. That was her entire life, was a hoylech. We cleaned up a little bit her desk in the house after she was nifter. And I came across a book with a paper folded over, a page folded over. And it was a story about Rav Pam Zechreinu Livracha, the Tarvadas Rosh Hashiva. And it was Rav Pam was in the hospital. He was very ill. And it came a point where he was just not responding. And the family felt that if visitors come, it would be too much. And so they hung a sign that they're not accepting any visitors. And Mashgiach and Tarvadas came to visit. He saw the sign and turned away. And the children said, man, we'll speak to our grandmother. The grandchildren said, maybe she'll let you in. And she allowed him to come in. And he spoke with Rav Pam. And he asked him some shaylas, some questions. And Rav Pam started speaking. And every moment he became more animated. And color started returning to his face. And then he said over a divrei Torah. And after a half hour, Mashgiach picked himself up to leave. And the Rebbetzin was thanking him. You don't know what you did. Come again. You Pashit gave life, gave chiyas. You were Machaya at Rosh Hashiva. And then they heard Rav Pam saying, you don't understand. Laying in a hospital with nobody coming to ask an eitzah, nobody coming to ask some hadracha. There's no purpose in life. I might as well be dead. When you come and you ask, and I can share and I can give, that's a reason to live. That's a reason to exist. And this was a story that she folded the paper and she underlined a couple of sentences. I was in a car with her going up to a convention. That was our special time that we would discuss what's going on in my yeshiva, and she'd help, and then we'd discuss the topic of the convention. And she said, and she had a setback then. And I said, Ma, how's it going? She says, Ellie, I'm okay. I'm at peace with dying. I've come to terms with it. If that's the desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then I'm ready. But I have so much more to offer. Maybe he'll grant me a couple more years. I have more to give. There's so much more to do. That was around 5 years ago. And at that point, she was offered the position in Torah Masorah where she was able to take 37 years of Bruria, of experience, of learning, of building people, and wanted to share it with the rest of the world. She was a Hailech. She was a Yaakov. There's a Gemara that tells us, Gemara in Sukkah, that Hillel HaZaken had 80 students. Shmeinim Talmidim Hayu Hillel HaZaken. He had 80 students. Shloishim Mehem, 30 of them, Ru'uyim Shetishra Aleim Shechina K'Moshe Rabbeinu. 30 of them were so great that just like the Shechina rested on Moshe Rabbeinu, it could have rested on them. Ushloishim Mehem Ru'uyim Shetamud Lehem Chama Ki Yeshua Ben Nun. And 30 of them were so great that they were able to hold the sun. The sun would stop for them, like it did for Yeshua ben Nun. Then there was 20 in between. Gadol Shabbakulan, Yonasan ben Uziel. Katan Shabbakulan, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Out of the 80 Talmidim, 60 that can have the Shekhinah rest upon them, like Moshe Rabbeinu. 30 that can stop the sun. And the smallest Talmud of them all was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And I heard a beautiful question. The Mishnah in Avos tells us, in the Messiah Moshe Kibul Torah Misinai, and it gives over the whole Messiah of Klal Yisrael, Yeshua is a Canaan. And in the second parak it tells us, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai Kibel mi Hillel u'mi Shammai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he was the link from Hillel HaZaken. He was Makabel the Torah from Hillel HaZaken. And then the Mishnah goes on. Chamisha Talmidim Hoyel Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He had 5 Talmidim, and the Mishnah mentions them. Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkinus, Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, Rabbi Yossi HaKoyin, Rabbi Shimon ben Hasanel, Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch. Hu Yabayna Shvachim. He used to always count, enumerate their praise. Rabbi Elazar ben Hurkinus was a Bar Sud. And the Mishnah goes on to tell us about each individual. And the question is obvious. Hillel HaZaken had 80 Talmidim. 30 of them that were comparable to Moshe Rabbeinu in resting the Shekhinah. Why was Yochanan ben Zakkai the smallest Talmud? Katan Shebekulan. Why was he the link in Mesiras HaTorah? A tremendous question. And I think the answer is something that my mother practiced constantly with her teachers, with her students, with everyone she came in place with. Hu hayamayna shvachan. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai used to enumerate, he used to elaborate. It wasn't mona. He told them their capabilities. But constantly, Moina Shvachan, he told them what you're capable of doing. You know you're a Bar Sud. You can retain so much Torah, and you can do this, and you can do that. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai empowered his Talmidim. And because he empowered the Talmidim, and he chazered it, he reviewed it, and he told them how great and how capable they are, Therefore, he was Zoicha to have Talmidim, that he was able to give over the Torah that he learned from Hillel HaZaken in its fullest and give it over to his Talmidim. My mother empowered her teachers. As my sister mentioned, she had no greater joy when a teacher was successful. She'd point out their strong points and she'd build on their strong points. She didn't micromanage. She wanted everyone to do and everyone to contribute their capabilities, what they can give, and build on that and make that a success and make that something which the teacher can give over to the students. She was meine Schwachan. And a student came, and that's what she did. She brought out the best of them. She built them. She nourished them. She was meine Schwachan. You're capable of doing this. And there are many students, and we've heard by the Shiva and afterwards, that if it wasn't for Mrs. Newman, I'd be nothing. She found their strong points. She found what they were capable of doing, and she reminded them and nurtured it. Recently, during Hurricane Sandy, there was an unusual thing that occurred. In Lakewood, one of the communities that were built, was an area of houses, and they planted there, the builder planted 10 trees. The trees were practically identical in height. They were planted at the same time, the same species. And it came Sandy, and 5 of them fell, and the other 5 remained standing firm. And people were wondering why these 5 trees fell and the others stayed, until they realized that under the first group, the 5 that fell, there was an underground irrigation system. They had hoses put underground that watered the trees and watered the grass, and the others didn't have. And therefore, those trees that had the water growing beneath it, right underneath it, they weren't encouraged to grow their roots deeper and deeper to find water. Their roots remained shallow. And when the wind came, the hurricane came, the trees fell over. The other 5 trees that didn't have a source of water right nearby, the roots had to grow deep and far to try to find the water. And therefore they stayed, and therefore they stood. Anybody that knew my mother, as much as she encouraged, as much as she nurtured, as much as she was meine Schwachin, she never gave you the easy street. She made you work for it. She challenged you. You had to work, you had to grow. There was nothing that you just got for nothing. You had to develop it. You had to work on it. You had to hurry, you had to strive. And then you were successful. Then it was meaningful. And then your roots were deep. And the tree can stand, can grow fruit, and give it to others. When Yaakov met Esav, Yaakov gave the matana. He pacified Esav. He persuaded Esav. And Esav tells him, Vayomer, Nisa v'neilecha ve'elcha l'negdecha. Let's travel together. We'll go together, and we'll travel together. I'll slow down a little bit, as Rashi says, and we'll travel together. Vayomer Elav, Adoni yodeya ki hayolodim rakim. My master knows, Esav, you know, the Yolodim are rakim, they're delicate. Vatzayin va'abokar oloi solai u'defokum yom echad u'meisu kol hatzayin. And I have so much cattle and sheep, and if I'm going to make them travel, I'm going to press them to go, and they're going to travel, they're going to die. Hayolodim rakim. Shortly afterwards, we learn of the superpowers of Yaakov Avinu's children. They were able to kill out a whole city of Shechem. Wouldn't have been sufficient to say, I have tzayin, I have bakar, I'm bogged down with them, I can't force them to travel so quick, it would be detrimental to their existence. What did he mean, Vayilodim Rakim? Furthermore, he says, well, you travel and I'll go slowly. Until we meet in Seir. And Rashi points out Yaakov had no intention of going to Seir. And the Mefarshim question, so what is he referring to? Seir. And Rashi says it's referring to the pasuk of Vachris Hayomim, V'olu Moshiyim B'har Tzion L'shpoitis Haresav. Was Yaakov a liar? And the Maral has his manner of answering it. Tzaddikim speak about next world because that's what their whole focus in this world is, speaking about the Asad Lavai, whereas Rishayim speak only about the present. I saw a pshat, and I think it's very appropriate. Ki hayelodim rakim. My children are impressionable. They're rakim, they're delicate. Things can make an impression on them. Yaakov thought to himself, I can take it, I'm going to travel with my family, with my Yelodim, together with Esav and his whole entourage. How much of a negative impact, what type of a negative hashpah will that have on my children? They're impressionable. They're going to be affected. Their Yiddishkeit will not be the same. Their emunah, their dedication won't be the same. Hayeladim Rachim, I can't go with Esav. And this didn't stop just with traveling with Esav, but throughout the history of Klal Yisrael, through all the various different exiles, through all the Golus that Klal Yisrael has gone, when they come amongst the Umas Ha'olam, when they come amongst the Goyim, in the beginning, they keep to themselves, but as time goes on, they begin to be influenced by the Umas Ha'olam, Hayeladim Rakim, and that exists today as much as it existed any time throughout history. Hayeladim Rakim. They're very impressionable. And until we come to Har Seir, until HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to reveal himself in the fullest, there's that sakana, that being amongst the Umas Ha'olam, being amongst them, being like them, talking like them, walking like them, dressing like them. Hayeladim Rakim, there's a sakana. And that was something that from the day my mother came to Bruriya, and she practiced that before as well, but the day she came to Bruriya, that was one thing. The doors were open to all Yidden. Everybody was able to come and learn. I think that was one of the requirements of taking the job. That was part of the question that the Rav Zechariah Levracha asked her. Rav Taitz Zechariah Tzaddik Levracha asked her at the interview. And she was open for everybody. And the only way you can be successful with teaching Torah to everyone is to create an environment in which the ruach, the air, the talk, the walk, everything is that of Torah. Torah dika hashkafas, Torah dika values. To create an individual that's understands not just what we do, but as we heard from Rabbi Oretz, why we do it. To create that wall, that barrier, that they can exist as much as we can amongst the Goyim and not be influenced or be minimally influenced. And that was something she gathered together a staff of teachers. She loved bringing Lakewood teachers. She helped them and she nurtured them, and a top staff, because she wanted to show them you could be from, you could be yeshivish, you could be Lakewood, and you could still be fun and normal, and you can give it over, and you can, it created a different value by them, because she understood that concept of Hayeladim Rakim. As I started, it's hard to stand over here and speak about my mother. Chazal tell us, at a Haskara, at a Hesped, the Neshama comes. My mother is here. She's here today. But really, if you think about it, she never left here. She's always been here. and will always be here, Be'ezus Hashem. Those nekudos that she taught, that she lived by, is something if we can walk away with. Hayalodim Rakim, it meant so much to her how you dress. It meant so much to her how you talk. Your hashkafos. It meant so much to her that you do as much as you can. And if you find something that now is too difficult, put it away on the side and come back to it later when you're ready. She taught. She empowered. And if we can learn from her life that we have to be a hoylech, we have to continuously grow. There's no such thing as sitting back. My father told me there were times that she had appointments, and she had many appointments, and she was methodical. She had appointments, things were to the clock, and someone would call and cancel, and she had to avoid. She didn't know what to do with herself. To do nothing. She had to find something to do. Because a Yid has to be a Hailech. The Yid has to be the Yaakov to be able to go out in the world and be confronted with Elokim, V'odam, and to be a Vatuchal. That could be a tremendous aliyah for her neshama. Everything that's done and continued to be done, what she taught, what she stood for, the programs that she created, and the chinuch, and the care and concern. I got a postcard from someone, a student, that wrote, and with this I'll conclude, Mrs. Newman really cared for her students. And she cared for someone who wasn't her student as well. I was in the outer office, the outer area outside her office, and I overheard a conversation that Mrs. Newman had. And on the phone she was unfortunately telling these parents that she couldn't accept their daughter. She explained to them why, but she was strong and firm. I'm sorry, I can't accept. And after she hung up the phone, my mother started to cry. She couldn't accept the student. Into the neshama, into the heart, it bothered her. It wasn't her student. It was someone who applied. She couldn't accept that student. She cared for all her students, for all her teachers, and she cared for anybody and everybody that came in her Dalet Amos. She cared for them. She tried to help them, and not just New York and New Jersey, but across the oceans, across the seas, all over. People would contact her. She really, really cared. And she felt that there was something tremendous in each and every individual that one had to bring out. Tonight's a night that we can sing Shira, a song of her accomplishment, a beautiful song of many years of accomplishment.
The evening would not be complete if we did not hear from an alumnus. What's the right word, Rabbi? Alumna? He's good at that. Alumna of Berea High School. I'd like to call upon Hannah Dreyfus to say a few words.
Hi. It's been a little while since I stood up here, but I have definitely missed it. Thank you all for coming here tonight. It is truly an honor and a rather humbling experience to be called to speak about Mrs. Newman, a woman who was and still remains today a role model of mine. For those who don't know me, my name's Hannah Dreyfus. I'm a Berea alumni, obviously. I graduated in the class of 2010. which already seems like a while ago. My time at Berea I was privileged to overlap the very last years of Mrs. Newman's time here. And even though it was at the very end of her stay here, the impression that she made on the school as a whole and on my personal experience as a Berea student was incredibly powerfully felt. When speaking to commemorate someone, you have a choice. You can either speak about that person, himself or herself, or you can speak about the impression that that person made on you or those very close to you. As Mrs. Newman's student, I am uniquely capable and equipped to address the latter. How Mrs. Newman affected me and how Mrs. Newman affected my close friends and fellow students at Berea. We've come here tonight to all give kavod to Mrs. Newman. As I learned at Berea, I believe it was in Mrs. Kaseman's Chumash class, to gain a deeper appreciation for a word and a concept, you have to look at the root word in Lashon HaKodesh. So looking at the word kavod, you see that it is very closely related to the word kaved, heavy. When something is heavy, it has the ability to make a deep impression on something else. As today we all gather here to pay our kavod to Mrs. Newman and her memory, we are remembering and truly appreciating the indelible impression that she left on all our minds, on our hearts, and on our lives. The extent of that impression could not have been made clearer to me than through a project I began shortly after Mrs. Newman's passing. On the morning that I received the news via email, my mind immediately started tracing back in kind of snapshot images the instances in which Mrs. Newman had been a part of my life and the memories that I had with Mrs. Newman. I switched into Berea in 10th grade. It's always hard to be new. That snapshot reel of memories that included Mrs. Newman included a small pink sprinkled donut attached with a note that Mrs. Newman put on my desk on my first day at Berea, which reminded the new girl in school that she was valued and loved, and just because Mrs. Newman remembered me. That snapshot reel of memories went on to include Mrs. Newman sitting in the front row right there of the mother-daughter productions, commenting late into the night on details of the production and on girls' performances that any less perceptive than I might have missed. The memory reel went on to include Mrs. Newman accompanying me on my 10th grade trip to England and France with Mrs. Captain and a little troop of Berea students, some of which are in the audience today, some of whom are in the audience today. I remember Mrs. Newman waltzing, and I mean literally waltzing, through the halls of mirrors at Versailles with Mrs. Captain. I remember Mrs. Newman davening on that special Shabbos we spent in London at the head of the room, serene, singing with her students. I remember Mrs. Newman in the hallway planting a huge kiss on my cheek in 11th grade and asking me rather emphatically how my progress in Mr. Glazer's American history class was going. Definitely deserved the kiss and the encouragement. And I remember her calling me personally into her office after I won my first trophy as a member of the Berea debate team, which was it was an incredibly formative part of my Berea experience. And she called me in. She asked me, you won that trophy? And I said, yeah. She said, did you research for it? I said, definitely. She said, you deserve it. The images fast-forwarded, and I started to think about who I am today. I didn't think of myself in terms of my major, the way that college students have become so accustomed to defining themselves. Rather, I thought of myself in terms of someone who still fights to make Torah part of their daily life, despite the noise and distraction. I thought of myself as someone who still works to make Shabbos a holy part of the end of every week. I thought of myself as someone determined to become a well-educated, articulate, and self-possessed representative of Torah Judaism. And I thought of myself as someone who is committed to spreading the values Mrs. Newman taught me into the next generation of Jewish thinkers and speakers. For all of these snapshots of who I am, who I was in these halls, and who I hope to be as a future leader of the Jewish people, I realized that I owe in large part my gratitude to Mrs. Chaya Newman. I knew that my story was far from the only one that there was to tell. I wanted to collect the various stories, the various gems that I knew lay among my peers and among their memories. And so I started circulating a document, which I labeled very accurately, How Your Life is Different Because of Mrs. Chaya Newman. And the point of the project was to collect the various testimonials of students and give them a chance to voice how their lives were different because of Mrs. Newman. The Google Doc is still around and easily accessible via various forms of social media and or email. And so far we've collected about 100 testimonials, ranging from students who started off in 1970s graduating class until students who were there past Mrs. Newman's time, who were merely writing to say, we never had the opportunity, the privilege to know Mrs. Newman, but we go to Berea today, and Berea is home, and we know that Mrs. Newman was the one who built us the home that's now ours. Each story was different, and each one was unique, and each story served as a testament to the unique impression that Mrs. Newman was able to make on so many lives. Having the privilege to read over and organize these personal testimonials left me simultaneously humbled and elated. Women who are today teachers and mothers, many of whom are in the audience tonight, shared examples of how what Mrs. Newman taught them they had directly applied to their classrooms and to their homes. Students remembered compliments Mrs. Newman had paid them in the hallways. Students remembered notes Mrs. Newman had personally handwritten them that literally changed their lives. Before I started reading these testimonials, I guess I realized the extent to which Mrs. Newman had altered and shaped my life. But when I started to kind of see the cumulative impact that Mrs. Newman had had on a generation, it was a truly, once again, humbling experience, realizing the difference that one person can make on so many lives. I could stand up here for a very long time, as I've proved during my time at Berea. And I could stand up here for a very long time tonight and speak about Mrs. Newman and all she accomplished and what she's personally given to me. But sometimes life's profoundest truths are said in short sentences. Brevity, I think it's a quote from Shakespeare, brevity is often key. So I know that Rabbi O and Mrs. Pikus said that they were going to be stealing someone's thunder when they said these quotes, but I would argue that and say that in the case of these two quotes, the more thunder the better. And so I end by reiterating two aphorisms that Miss Newman used to form her school and the vision by which she lived her life. And by repeating these, I think I am ensuring that these two statements have a place in the future of the Jewish people, at least on my part. I speak on my behalf. The first one, when you teach a boy, you teach a man. When you educate a girl, you educate a family. The second, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. I hope that I am capable of living up to the power of these two statements, which represent not only words but a vision. These words represent a dream that continues to live and breathe in the very hall in which we all sit tonight. Thank you all for coming out, and I hope that Mrs. Newman, who I do believe is here tonight, I hope that I can make her proud.
was wondering if Tova Plotkin happens to be in the room tonight. Did you get here? Tova? Tova, you here? Are any of the Schwab sisters here? Okay, so they wrote a poem. So I'd like to end the evening reading a poem, a tribute to Mrs. Newman. I had the privilege of living across the street from the Schwabs when I first moved into Elizabeth, and I was a teacher in the school when Rivka was a student here. But this is a poem that's signed by the Schwab sisters. Now I'm going to end with this. So before I end, I'd just like to invite everyone to stay afterwards. Please enjoy yourself at the table for some light refreshments. There are drinks in the back. There are car magnets and pushkas out in the lobby. Please take one. A tribute to Mrs. Newman. A woman of wisdom, wit, and understanding. A vision for a school most outstanding. Chachma, Bina, Deya, all wrapped up in one. There is only one Mrs. Newman under the sun. Care, concern, compassion, guidance, and more were always available at your open door. Pride, accomplishment, success, and achievement for each student who received her own special treatment. Ma Rabu Ma'asecha, we look back and surely see the many beautiful fruits that came from this tree. The hundreds of girls who spent their lives here, their lives continued to be enriched year after year. This great big zechus you now carry with you, it will continue to grow. It is very true. Appreciation, thank you. Hakaras Hatov will always be etched into all Brurier girls' hearts for eternity. Thank you all for coming this evening. And we have, before you leave, one short video for you to watch.
It is just a wonderful, wonderful life. I feel Hashem has blessed me so much that I can't thank Him enough. And I can't imagine any other career where you could say that at the end of your life. It is just a wonderful, wonderful life. I feel Hashem has blessed me so much that I can't thank Him enough. And I can't imagine any other career where you could say that at the end of your life.